In the aftermath of Australia's most devastating bushfires, when smoke choked the sky and entire forests had turned to ash, a single dog's unlikely story began to capture the hearts of people across the world. His name was Bear, not because he was big or fierce, but because, despite his troubled past and unmanageable quirks, he proved to have the heart of a warrior and the nose of a savior. Bear wasn't the kind of dog most people dream of bringing home. He was too energetic, too intense, and his obsessive behaviors made him impossible to keep as a regular pet. He had been abandoned, misunderstood, passed from shelter to shelter, all because no one saw what he was truly capable of. But what made him different would one day make him extraordinary. As the fires tore across New South Wales and Queensland, leaving behind lifeless trees and scorched earth, thousands of helpless animals were caught in the chaos, trapped, burned, dehydrated, or worse. Among them were Australia's most iconic and vulnerable creatures, koalas, hidden high in the canopies or curled up silently in burned foliage, too injured to move. They were silent victims in a deafening disaster. But Bear could hear what others could not. He could smell what others could never see. And when paired with thermal drones and skilled wildlife teams, Bear became the ultimate rescue machine. His mission wasn't flashy or loud. It began each time with the soft command, "Let's go find." And Bear, tail high, nose twitching, would leap into action, racing through smoke-stained forests where death lingered in the air. With his booted paws protecting him from hidden embers, he sniffed through ashes, searching for the faintest trace of a koala's scent. Urine, scat, anything that might mean one of them had survived. Time and again, Bear would suddenly drop to the ground, his eyes locking with his handlers, silently insisting that there was life nearby. It was a look that couldn't be mistaken. It said, "Come on, human, don't you smell that? We've got someone to save." In that moment, his entire body became a lifeline between the lost and the living. A koala, barely breathing, clinging to the remnants of a charred tree, would be spotted above, because Bear never stopped believing they were still out there. From November 2019 to April 2020, Bear found over 100 koalas who otherwise would have perished in silence, too sick to move, too injured to call out. He didn't just find bodies, he found hope. He found stories waiting for a second chance. Some were dehydrated, some had their paws scorched, and some were slowly dying of smoke inhalation. But because of Bear, many of them were treated, rehabilitated, and eventually released. And yet, it wasn't only about numbers. For every life Bear touched, there was a story, a silent plea answered, a life pulled back from the brink. In the blackened wastelands, where even nature itself seemed to mourn, Bear's presence was like a heartbeat, proof that not all was lost. Every time he got to play with his favorite ball after a rescue, he wasn't just being rewarded, he was celebrating life, and so were we. The koala is more than just a symbol of Australia's wild beauty. It is a quiet, gentle soul that clings to the trees of its homeland, trusting the forest to shelter it through storms, drought, and time. But the fires of 2019 and 2020 were not a storm. They were a catastrophe that no living thing could have anticipated, and certainly not the koalas, who are slow to flee and silent in their suffering. In just a few short months, an estimated 6,382 koalas perished in New South Wales alone, their habitats reduced to lifeless skeletons of what once were thriving forests. The smoke was so thick that entire cities were blanketed in haze. The air was no longer breathable. The ground beneath the trees turned to charcoal. And amid this apocalyptic landscape, the koalas, those fragile climbers of the eucalyptus, were either burned, suffocated, or left desperately clinging to trees that could no longer feed them. But some survived. Some managed to find pockets of green untouched by flame, tiny oases surrounded by devastation. Others, injured and alone, found themselves trapped in unfamiliar wastelands, burnt, thirsty, unable to move, their lives hanging by threads thinner than the branches they once rested on. For these survivors, rescue came not as a guarantee, but as a final hope, and often it arrived in the form of Bear. Yet even with all the heroic efforts, not every story had a happy ending. There was Ellenborough Lewis, a name now etched into the hearts of people across the world. When a video surfaced of a woman running shirtless into the blazing woods to save him, her arms bare, her face tight with fear and determination, it became a symbol of raw humanity. She found him smoldering on the ground, his fur singed, his paws red with pain. She wrapped him in her own shirt, poured water over his trembling body, and carried him through the smoke to safety. But it was already too late. The burns on Lewis's body were too severe, his suffering too deep. At the Koala Hospital in Port Macquarie, they tried to save him. They kept him warm, hydrated, medicated. But despite everything, the damage was irreversible. A few days later, he was euthanized, to end his pain with dignity, even as millions mourned. His loss was more than just a tragic footnote. It was a mirror reflecting the horror of what had happened to thousands like him, who never got a second chance. In those days, hospitals across Australia overflowed with burned, blinded, and dehydrated koalas. Some could barely breathe from the smoke. Others had lost entire families. Many were brought in too late, their wounds already infected, their organs already failing. But amid the grief, there was also a fire of a different kind, a fire in the hearts of those who refused to give up, who fought for every koala that could still be saved. Koalas that could be treated were given water, rest, and healing space. When strong enough, they were released into surviving pockets of forest, sometimes near their old homes, sometimes into new ones, wherever eucalyptus still grew. The goal was not just survival, but restoration of life, of movement, of freedom. And behind each rescue was a network of people and creatures, veterinarians, wildlife carers, drone pilots, and of course Bear, working around the clock while the world watched in awe and sorrow. These weren't just animals. They were stories, individual lives, each with its own pain, its own struggle, and sometimes its own miracle. In the heart of the chaos, when time felt slower and every second mattered, a remarkable alliance formed, one that spanned species, disciplines, and states of exhaustion. It wasn't just Bear who was out there, nose to the ground and heart full of determination. He was part of a tight, relentless team, human and animal, united by a shared mission, to pull life from the ashes, even if only one heartbeat at a time. Every mission began the same way, with a drone sent ahead, its thermal camera scanning the skeletal canopy for signs of heat, of breath, of movement that shouldn't be there. The screen would light up with flickers, some false hopes, some the real thing. And then it was time to move, time to trust Bear, time to wade into the charred remains of what had once been lush forest. The trees groaned, the ground crumbled, and every step forward felt like a confrontation with nature's wrath. Bear's handler watched his every movement with trained precision, while a koala spotter scanned the trees above, squinting through smoke and dust. But when Bear dropped to the ground and refused to move, it meant only one thing. He had found someone. And the silence that followed was always filled with the electric buzz of hope. What came next was never routine. Each discovery required careful judgment. Was the koala safe to leave in place? Was it already too weak to survive the night? Was there enough food left in the area to sustain it? If not, the rescue began, a slow, cautious process of coaxing a traumatized animal from the trees. Sometimes it took a pole with a fluttering flag. Other times, they would leave soft traps at the base of the tree, returning at dawn, hearts clenched with uncertainty. But this wasn't the end of the journey. It was only the beginning. Once secured, the koalas were rushed to wildlife triage centers, where veterinarians and volunteers worked feverishly to hydrate, bandage, and stabilize them. Some recovered quickly. Others would remain in care for weeks, even months, relearning how to climb, to grip, to trust. Some never left the hospital walls, but every single one mattered. As the bushfires raged on, Bear and his team moved fast. They had to. Each hour lost meant another koala succumbing to secondary infections, starvation, or internal injuries invisible to the naked eye. And with every new fire front, their mission grew harder. not just physically, but emotionally. Because this wasn't just about numbers anymore. These were names. These were eyes they had looked into. Creatures who trembled in their arms. Survivors they had once cheered for. And still, they pushed forward. Bear was tireless. It was the humans who needed breaks, who had to stop and catch their breath. Bear, on the other hand, would happily dive into puddles for a moment's rest, tongue lolling, eyes sparkling with anticipation, only to leap back to work seconds later. He didn't complain. He didn't question. He just searched, driven by something no one could fully explain, a purpose that seemed to burn brighter than any flame. Together, they formed something rare, a bridge between the human world and the wild one, where compassion could still win, where technology and the wild one, where compassion could still win, where technology and instinct joined hands, and where every rescue was a testament to what's possible when we refuse to turn away. Even as rescues continued, and even as Bear and his team tracked deeper into the blackened forests of eastern Australia, a harsh and unrelenting truth hung over their heads like the ash-filled sky. This was not just a wildlife crisis, it was a national trauma, a collective grieving for a world unraveling far too quickly. Entire ecosystems had collapsed in a matter of days. Forests that had stood for centuries were now graveyards of silence. Birds no longer sang. Leaves no longer rustled. The wind itself carried only heat, dust, and the scent of char. What was once vibrant and teeming with life had been reduced to silhouettes of death. Trees with no canopy, soil with no roots, skies without flight. And within these ruined landscapes, the koalas suffered quietly, their pain made worse by their nature. They don't cry out, they don't flee, and when they're hurt, they freeze. Many were found sitting motionless in scorched trees, their paws raw and bleeding, their fur singed, their lungs poisoned by the smoke they had breathed in, trying to cling to life. Others had already succumbed, their bodies found curled beneath blackened branches, alone in death as they were in survival. This was the cost of fire in a world that had been pushed too far. Climate change had dried the land, stripped the forests of moisture, and turned entire regions into tinderboxes. The fires had not come as a surprise. They had come as a warning that was ignored for far too long. But in the face of such unbearable loss, something remarkable stirred. People didn't just watch, they acted. Veterinarians left clinics in cities to volunteer in temporary bush clinics. Farmers opened their land to wildlife shelters. Volunteers from around the world sent money, supplies, and prayers. Koala hospitals overflowed not only with injured animals, but with the overwhelming love of strangers who couldn't bear to see these gentle creatures disappear. Social media exploded with images of bandaged paws and grateful eyes, with stories of second chances and reunions. The world, it seemed, had remembered that these animals were more than just symbols. They were individuals with pain, memory, and hope. For Bear and his team, that meant there was no room to stop. They carried with them not just tools and traps, but responsibility. The burden of knowing that for many koalas, they were the only chance. They returned again and again to burned zones, sometimes finding a survivor weeks after the flames had passed. These were moments that defied belief. A koala found curled beneath a hollow tree, surviving on rainwater and desperation. Another found limping on the edge of a road, its eyes clouded but still alive. These were miracles born from sheer resilience and the unwavering effort of those who refused to give up. Bear was more than a dog. He had become a symbol, a creature once rejected, now leading the way toward healing. And yet, he remained humble in the most touching way possible. All he ever wanted in return was his ball. That rubber toy, worn and chewed, was the only reward he needed. Because for Bear, the work was its own joy, the rescue its own prize. But for the humans watching these tragedies unfold, joy was harder to come by. For every koala saved, there were dozens who could not be reached in time. For every hospital ward filled with recovering animals, there were empty forests where no koalas would ever return. Conservationists were forced to face gut-wrenching decisions, where to send limited resources, which habitats could be salvaged, and which were lost for good. They knew that saving individual lives, while beautiful, was not enough. The fires had revealed how fragile everything had become. It wasn't just about this season, it was about the future. Would the surviving koalas have enough habitat left to return to? Would the eucalyptus trees regrow? Would the next fire season bring even worse devastation? These were the questions that haunted every victory, every rescue, every quiet moment shared between a saved animal and the human who had carried it from death. And through it all, Bear kept working. He worked during the height of the pandemic. He worked when donations slowed and when cameras stopped rolling. While the world moved on to its next crisis, Bear's mission never changed. There were still lives to find, still ashes to dig through, still hope to protect. When the flames are gone and the ground cools, when the last siren has faded into memory and the media attention drifts toward new stories, what remains is never silence. It is the weight of what we lost and the responsibility of what we still have the power to protect. The koalas that survived carry invisible scars, some physical, others hidden in the way they now cling a little tighter to the trees, a little longer to the branches they trust. Many of them returned to forests that barely resemble home. Some never found their families again. And yet they adapted, they healed, and with the help of those who refused to look away, they climbed again. Slower maybe, but with the unshakable will to live. And then there's Bear. He continues to train, to lead, to dig his paws into soil still haunted by fire and find the life that refuses to be erased. His work didn't end with the last fire season. It never will, because the bush will burn again. The droughts will return, and each time it will be Bear and dogs like him who step in first, long before it's safe for most humans to even enter. Bear is living proof of something rare and essential, that even the unwanted, even the ones once considered broken or difficult, can become heroes of the highest kind. He was never meant for a backyard. He was never meant for a leash and a quiet park. Bear was built for moments like these, for turning ruin into redemption, for transforming tragedy into life saved, one silent rescue at a time. And so, we are left with a choice. We can allow this story to fade like the smoke that once choked Australia's skies, or we can carry it forward, as a warning, yes, but also as a call to action. Because this is not just a story about fire. It is about climate, about responsibility, about the relationship between humanity and the natural world we so often take for granted. It is about how, in our most broken moments, we can still choose compassion, still choose courage, still choose to act. In Bear's world, every scent matters, every life matters. Every heartbeat is worth chasing down, even through miles of blackened trees and silence. And maybe, if we learn to see through his eyes, through the eyes of a dog who only ever wanted to help, we might start believing the same. Because heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear fur and boots. Sometimes they walk on four legs. And sometimes the greatest among them don't ask for anything at all, except the chance to do it again.